I click on reset, it resets back to 0. And if I click on decrease, the number decreases and the color also changes to red. Right now I have an empty HTML file, CSS file and a JavaScript file. So let's start writing. First, I need the boilerplate HTML code. So for that, I'll just hold Shift and 1 so I get the exclamation point. Press on enter, you'll get the boilerplate, and I'll just name this counter. And here I will just write H1 and see if this works or not. So for this video, I'll be using an extension which is called live server, so it handles all the reloading, so you don't have to go again and again and reload the page. So in VS Code you can go on this extension tab and search for live server. So this live server, so you can go and install this live server. It is by Ritwik Day. So after you install this, you'll get something like here you can click on go live, or you can just right click and open with live server. So once you open this, you have your test file here, and I'll just change this to hello, and if I save it, you will see that it changes to hello and I don't have to reload again and again. So let's just create the whole HTML first. So I need a div which has a class of counter, and inside this counter I have an h1 which says counter, and I added a cool icon or emoji. So for that, windows and period, and you'll get this, and I searched for counter and this is the icon which I used. So I added an h1. After that, I need a span with an id, so hash of value. So here is the value which is being added using JavaScript. So we'll do that when we're doing the JavaScript part. So value is done, and after that I need a div which has the button. So div.btns, so buttons. Then I need a button with a class of btn, and this will be adding decrease. So this is the decrease button, so it will have a class of decrease. Then I'll have two more buttons. So in VS Code you can hold Alt, Shift and downward key so that it duplicates two more times. So I'll change this to reset, and here I'll add a reset class, and then here I'll do it increase and a class of increase. So this is the whole HTML which we need. So let's see how it looks like. Right now we have a counter, then these buttons, and let's just add a 0 in span. So this is how the HTML looks like. So let's move and do the CSS part. So before we do that, let's just import all these links, so CSS and JavaScript. So before title, I'll just say link, and inside this I'll add the CSS file, and just before the body tag ends, I will add the script file. So source is app.js, and if I save it, now CSS and JavaScript are linked. Okay, and also let's add the font also. So I use the font which is Work Sans, so you can get that font on fonts.google.com. Search for Work Sans, you'll get this. Go down, regular, select the style, go on import tag and import this line. So add import and this URL hole. Copy this and go back to your VS Code, and where you have styles, so just before everything, paste it here. So you have your font installed on your web page. Now let's start writing the CSS. So first we need to remove the default styling. So if I show you what default styling means, it has some margins by default. So every browser has some of these margins, so we have to remove them. For that, I'll just use Shift 8 so to get the star. Then inside these curly brackets, I'll add margin is 0, padding is also 0, and box sizing is border box. And one more thing which I want to do is, since I want the same font everywhere in our website, I can add font family here only. So I'll go back here, copy this font family, go back to VS Code and paste it here. So now I have Work Sans installed. If you see, the font is installed and the basic styles are removed. Okay, so we can move forward. So the next thing which I want to do is I want to center everything on our web page. So I only have one thing which is called counter, and I'll add a display of flex. Flex direction is column. I'll align everything in center, justify content also center, and I'll also give a height of 100, not 200, 100 VH. Okay, if I save it, you'll see that everything is now center aligned, but we have to give margins and stuff. So let's do that. So I have my counter, and inside this counter I have my H1. So I'll increase the font size to somewhere around 48 pixels. Then I'll select my span. So inside this counter I have my span. So span has a font size of 50 pixels and a margin of 20 pixel top bottom and 0 pixel left and right. If I save it, now I have these things here. Now I need to style the buttons. So for buttons, I gave a class of buttons, and inside this buttons I have these buttons. So for that I'll go in counter, then btns, then button. So I'll select all these buttons together. I'll remove the outline. So outline is none. Border is 1 pixel, solid, and a gray color. So I'll add RGBA to 0, tab 0, tab 0, and then 0.3, something like this. I'll add a bit of padding. Top bottom is 10 pixel, left right is 15 pixel, border radius is 4 pixels, cursor to pointer, background I'll remove. So I'll add transparent background. Then I have to increase the font size to 18 pixels, margin is 10 pixels around the whole button, and also I will be adding a transition of all 0.2 seconds at ease. So this transition is used because when we hover over the button, the color is changing. So I've added that transition just before I added the hover state. So you'll see what happens. So I have the whole CSS setup, just I need to add the hover state. Okay, so let's add it again. So counter, or I'll just copy this from here, paste it here. Then after button, when we hover over the button, it should change the background color to hash 2b 2b 2b, and the color of the text should become white. So this is how the CSS looks like. We're done with the CSS. We won't be adding anything else because it's a simple HTML JavaScript counter. So the main part is JavaScript. So let's move on to the JavaScript part. Okay, I'll shift back to this. Yeah. Okay. So right now what I want to do is, when I initially the count is 0. So when I click on increase, the count should increase by 1. If I click on decrease, the count should decrease by 1. And if I click on the reset, so the count should reset back to 0. So what is happening here is we have a variable or a constant which is 0, and when we click on increase, so whenever we click on that button, the count variable increases its value, and whenever we decrease the value or click on decrease, the value of that variable decreases. So for that we have to create a variable which is called count. So I'll say let count equals to 0. So this is the initial value, and whenever I click on the button, the value of this variable increases or decreases according to the button which I click. So let's select the button. So I'll say const btns. So I'll select all these buttons together. So for that I'll use document query selector all. So I'll select all these buttons which have a class of .btn, and also I want to select the span which I gave a value ID of value. Const value is equals to document query selector, not all, and I gave it a value ID, so hash value. So now I have my buttons and value. So when we're selecting by query selector all, we get node list. So in the node list we can use a method which is called for each. So buttons dot for each. So for each button, what I want is to add an event listener. So whenever I click on that button, it should show me or it should select that button. So let me just show you what this button is. So I'll console log the buttons. So if I go back here and inspect it, okay, inspect, go to console, you'll see I have a node list which has all these buttons. So I can use the for each loop. So buttons dot for each. So for each takes a callback function. So the parameter you can add anything. So I'll call it button. So for each button, console log this button. So we'll see what is happening. So for each button, just console log the button. So now you'll see that we have the button. So button dot decrease, button reset, button increase. So I have all these buttons. So now what I want to do is we want to add an event listener to these buttons. So I'll add button dot add event listener. So it should listen the event of a click. So whenever I click on this button, I have something, I'll add a callback function which has a parameter of e. So inside this function, what will happen is I have something which is called current target and class list. So let me show you what that is. So I'll select, I'll write const style equals to e dot target, not target, it's current target dot class list. And if I console log this style, save, you'll see that if I click on this button, I get these classes. So I have button class, decrease class. Okay, so from here, the styles, I can manipulate the increase, reset or decrease, whatever I want. So we'll be using this style to add the colors. Okay, so now what I want to do is if I click on increase button, the count should increase. So we'll be using the if loop. So if style dot contains, so style dot contains, if this button has a style which has the properties of btn and increase, so if that style contains a class of increase, so you what should be done is count should be added. So count plus plus. And what I also want to do is we have to change the value of that this span. Okay, so I have count here. So count is increased whenever you click on a button which has the class list of increase. So after this, what I'll do is change the value of count. So value dot text content equals to count. Okay, if I save it, you'll see that if I click on increase, the value of count increases. So as long as I click it, it changes. But right now decrease and reset don't work. So let's do them as well. So else if style dot contains reset, set the value of count to 0. And same as this, if we can do like if style dot contains decrease, so count should be minus minus, else just set the value of count to 0. Now if I go here, click on decrease, the value changes to -1. Click on increase, it increases by 1. If I click on reset, it resets back to 0. So this is the whole functionality done. So what's happening, let me just explain to you once again. So we are selecting all the buttons. We set a variable to count, variable count to 0. So we're checking for each button. Whenever we click on that button, if that button has a class list of increased, then increase the count to 1. Or if that button has a class list of decrease, decrease the value by 1, or else set the value of count to 0. And in this line, we're adding the text content, or we're changing the content to the count. So whatever number we're at currently. So this is basically the functionality is done. Now what we can do is just like we did here, if we click on increase, the value is increasing, the color is green. And if we decrease the value of or the color of this value is red. So let's do that as well. So for that I need to do again is if And again, if we're using if statement, so if count is greater than 0, so value dot style dot color is green. So if the count is greater than 0, set the value to green. And then again, if the value of count is less than 0, set the value to red. And if it is equal to 0, set the value to black. So equals to 0 to black. And this is basically it. If we click on increase, the color changes to green and the counter increases. If we click reset, changes back to 0, decrease, color changes back to red. So this is the whole project which we wanted to make using Vanilla JavaScript. For more such small and little JavaScript projects, make sure you like the video and subscribe to our channel.